Hello, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Now we all understand the great truth of climate change and the man-made global warming. We all know that we've got to go to net zero. We've got to have these very important policies, he says with his tongue firmly in his cheek at this point. And of course, if you say something against this, we know that, of course, that censorship comes down and people don't want to know. Although it does seem that more and more people are beginning to suspect that the direction that the authorities are pushing us up in is not perhaps the best for all of us. Now, I'm very pleased to say today I'm talking to Paul Burgess, who is a filmmaker, a climate specialist, I'm going to say. He's been doing all sorts of research in this area, including weather, climate, and all sorts of other bits and pieces, a retired chartered engineer. And I'm just going to enjoy a lovely conversation with him to find out more about perhaps the veil pulled back on this whole climate change nonsense. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. I'll first of all apologise to you. My left eye has got a bit of a problem at the moment, having treatment, so I may have it closed a lot. But that's, I can carry on as normal. It will be repaired in a few weeks, they tell me.
Well, I hope so. The audience will know that I have an artificial eye, and
Yes.
I went through 4 years of all sorts of issues. And funnily enough, I was later told by one of my guests that a doctor, Dr. Sarah Myhill, who's coming back on the channel very soon, she said I could have fixed that for you with iodine. So I was a bit annoyed, really, that I had all this problem and then the eye removed. But anyway, that's a side issue. Paul, lovely to have you on. Could you just give us a little sort of potted background of your history and particularly your involvement with climate and stuff?
I'm 78 years old now, so I've been doing various things for a long time. Before I start this, I'll say this. I'll go through some of my qualifications and history, but my biggest qualification that I say to everyone is I've got 10 grandkids and I want a better world for them. And
Well,
that's
I
my
think
biggest interest. Right. I have got a Bachelor of Science and I've got a Master of Science. I specialised in water resources. I ended up, I built my first mathematical model of, I'll say it again, mathematical model of of river flows, actually, of rain-fed river flows, which didn't have springs in them. So the rain-fed river flows meant I was measuring rainfall almost dampened, which is quite nicely dampened in the flow. But I discovered in doing that work, when I built that work, that you could directly see the influence of the 11-year sun cycle and some influence of other cycles. So that meant that in me trying to forecast 1 in 1,000-year floods, if you like, as we called it then, or forecast droughts, and I was water resource engineer for Wales. I became water resource engineer for the whole of Wales. So I was there for the 76 drought, for example, which is the worst we've had. And that was a worldwide thing, by the way. Even Antarctica was reduced in the 76.
Wow.
So I got involved early on, if you like, doing the hard work with proper mathematical models, not what we have today. And I pretty well left it then. I was always interested in the environment. Even as a child, with my pocket money, I contributed to trying to keep clean rivers with an organization that used to prosecute people who polluted rivers, called the ACA, the Anglers Cooperative Association back then. So, I've always been interested in the environment, and I come with qualifications, if you like. I then left, and what happened was, in working in Wales, I was not only in charge of all water resource planning, I was also in charge of all technical data. So what this meant was anything to do with any data passed through my department. And so I'll give you an example. One day, Lord Brecon, who was the chairman, and he was based in Brecon, this organisation for Wales, he walked in and picked up a first piece of paper on my table and he said, "What's this, Paul?" Now, he did this to everybody. It wasn't just for me. So I said, "That's a pollution report, sir." And he said, "Fine, so what happens to this?" I said, "Well, I sent it to the Clean River guys, and I sent it to operations, and we ignore it." They said, "Why do we ignore it?" And I said, "Because we are the polluter. We are the biggest polluter." Yeah. And that's why we ignore it.
Yeah.
And then occasionally I had And I think what, if I give one more example, which finished me off really, I had the Anti-Coastal Pollution League sent me a chart of all the raw water sewage outflows into the sea around Wales, and they missed a lot out. So when they said, is this right? I wrote back and said, well, it is right, actually, what you've got, but you've missed about half of them out. Here's the full list. My attitude to that was very simple. The fact is, today, the Victorians did more work for us in sewage than we've done. It was done a long time ago.
Hmm.
And we had a problem. We weren't investing in the 70s, this was. We weren't
Wow.
investing into the future sewage under nationalized industries, by the way. So it's not to do with private industry, under nationalized industries. So my way of dealing with this, being a public servant, was to tell the truth back to these people and then to say, we haven't got the money to do it. So that way you identify the problem and you can put the political pressure in the right place to cure the problem.
Right.
Well, the chief executive and everyone heavily criticized me for it because I've let out information. But hold on here. I thought this is public information. I'm a public servant. We are here to serve the public. That was the beginning of the end for me because there were so many things then happening, which, and I stood on a national committee for the whole of the UK, and they were working on a project, and the project was going to take 2 years. The feasibility study they commissioned cost £25,000. It was going to take 2 years and cost £250,000 back in 1973-4. And I got fed up with that. So I just went away, wrote the system in 10 weeks, came back, finished. And that did away with the entire committee, by the way. So I managed to
Wow.
do away with the committee. I mean, but then we exported that system from Wales to the rest of the UK. The whole nation took it. I think Sweden took it, and Canada took it. And so I ended up with my water resource planning department. My job was to plan resources and reservoirs and all this. I ended up making a profit.
My
Um,
goodness.
I did other things that made a profit as well. And I actually had the accounts people come to see me and said, you realize how much you've mucked up our system completely. So I said, why? And they said, because you're meant to be an expenditure department and our computer system doesn't allow for you to make profits. And I thought there was a compliment. I thought it was a backhanded compliment.
Yes.
But I quickly realized it wasn't. They were serious. And
Oh, right.
and I thought this is not a place for me. The finally,
No.
quite funnily, later on, I have a fishing lake, and quite funnily, later on, after I'd left the water industry, the chairman of the new privatized water industry had booked some fishing, and he told me over the phone that he knew about me and would have wanted me actually because I was quite a maverick. I kept doing things that no one else would do. So that was my background, and I really only recently realised that right throughout my career, even when I went into industry, I became a disruptor. I disrupted almost everything I touch. But by the year 2000, um, I became interested in the climate again with Al Gore and all that.
Mm.
Very quickly realised, within a year or two, I realised this is totally fake. Yes, I mean, it doesn't take any critical examination of any depth at all. And of course, every single one of those predictions has been proven wrong. Let's go further. Every single one of the climate horror predictions has been proven wrong. There isn't one that's been proven right. So I became interested. And round about 2008-10, I started cruising in my own boat around the world. And I then started making videos. I'd already done a lot of videos for my work. So we had a full broadcast studio and things. So I started making videos on climate change. I've got over 80 now on my YouTube channel, which is Climate Realism by Paul Burgess. I don't make any money out of this. It is simply to spread the message for my grandkids, really. That's how I think about it. So I make these videos and I try to make them as entertaining as I can for what can be a dry subject
Yes, of course.
to do. So and so that's how I got into it, and it was slow to grow at first. But I mean, last month we added 1,000 subscribers, and we just passed 6,000, and it's beginning to take off. And I've just been invited to an international symposium over in a EU country where the government are paying for my expenses. Again, no money, but my expenses are covered. And to give a talk to an international audience on climate realism. And so it's beginning to get traction now, which is pleasing for me because there's sometimes a lot of hard work for very little return at the beginning, but you've got to keep plodding on. So that's my background.
Well, I'm hoping that I can send a few more subscribers your way to your YouTube channel,
Thank
which
you.
we will put the link in the description, of course.
Mhm.
Although at the moment, I have to say that since I've had a couple of strikes on this platform,
Yes.
my viewing figures have dropped dramatically, and it's not as if I've suddenly changed what I'm doing. But
Oh,
anyway,
I know what it's like.
so let me ask you this then. And you know, you could see it obviously that the claim that people like Greta as a sort of a bullhorn for what we ought to be doing, and how dare us do anything differently to
Yeah.
what she thinks should be done,
Mhm.
and other scientists must equally see that, although
They do.
you know, many of them sort of wish not to say anything, perhaps, or
Oh,
they can't afford to say anything because of the way funding goes
correct.
in the industries. The question I want to know is how have they got away with it, with this continual dreadful scenario, the catastrophic scenario, for so long, and why do people still believe it?
Right. That's a very good question, actually, because it opens up a Pandora's box of issues.
Yes,
And
sorry about that.
I'm going to use it. I'm going to use the question to start with a little thing I'm doing now.
Mm,
I was basically I was asked to help a solar farm proposal down near Swansea, and I went along to the development meeting where the experts were there. Asked us the questions. Yes. So
yes,
the first question they asked was, how much power? They said 20 megawatts. Yeah. How much power does your solar farm produce? And they said 20 megawatts. I said, no, no. How the quantity? How many megawatt hours? No, 20 megawatts. I said, no, no. How many megawatt hours? Your 20 is what's printed on the panel. You don't get that. How many megawatt hours? Oh, 20. So I said, do you know the difference between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour? Because that's what you pay for a home is a kilowatt hour, which is 1 kilowatt going for 1 hour. Yeah, that's what you pay.
yeah,
And they didn't. So the next thing I asked was, where's your environmental report? Oh, this is strategic. It supplies 5,300 homes. And that makes it strategic. It doesn't need an environmental report. So I said, oh, but don't worry. We've done a Badger survey. When? We did our own. The Welsh government don't require an environmental report, but we did our own Badger survey. When did you do it? Oh, we went up for a few hours one afternoon to look for them. They're
one
nocturnal.
afternoon. Yes, they're nocturnal.
Actually, there's lots of badger sets there. It's on an ancient woodland, and there's lots of bat species and putting radio towers and everything up. No environmental report. So they said, look, ask the questions and we'll answer you in writing. So I asked all the questions and they couldn't answer me. And what came out of this was this. In the UK, and I've done a video on this called The Green Deceit, The Great Green Deceit, I think, and the recent video. And that goes into some detail, but it's as simple as this. Every single solar farm and wind farm in the UK, every single one lies about how many homes they can produce, they can supply. Because if they say 10,000 homes, according to Ofgem says 20% of the home's electric and 80% is gas. And what they mean is they can only supply the 20. So if they
Right,
said we can supply 10,000 homes, but providing 80% of the energy is coming from gas, I'd be happier. It's
right,
actually worse than that because that's what's coming from the solar farm or the wind farm. It's the same thing. So that got me into this then. I realized all you've got to do is I inspected the whole output of all the solar farms and all the wind farms. I divided then, to get the rate they were actually producing at for the whole of the UK. And in the case of solar farms, it's 11%. So you get 11% of what they put on the panel, which is what they show you. And in the case of wind farms last year, it was 31.8%. These aren't my figures, by the way. These are me just taking two figures and using simple arithmetic. So if you see a wind farm, that the wind farm, one of them says we supply 14,000 homes. When you actually compare it to Ofgem and there's another one called BEIS, which is a bigger average for the house, that is actually 17% is all they can get, and 20%, 21%. It all comes out on average, they only supply the 20%. But because they're always away from the grid and they have relatively high resistance power lines to the grid, the losses to the grid can be as high as 17% again. So
right.
so it isn't even the 20%, but let it go.
Yeah.
So what happens then? Now, ask the question. What you ask the question. This is how it comes back to your question. I wrote, my MP is Simon Hart. He's the chief whip. So his job is to whip all the Conservatives, grant them permission, say you can go away today and everything. He runs the party day to day. He's with the Prime Minister every day. Yeah. Simon Hart. So I wrote to him and I showed him the simple arithmetic. Let me just take their figures. So I took a solar farm. This is their claimed output last year in megawatt hours. They claimed so many homes, 14,000. Divide by that, and you get this. But that doesn't meet, that's only 20%. Yes?
Yes.
So in other words, they're deceiving people by saying 14,000 homes. Do you
Yes.
agree?
Yes.
One line reply. I don't agree with your conspiracy theory. Go ahead and make the video. Right? Now, I wrote back and I said, I'm going to shame you. You know, it's simple division. My recent email to him is, it just gives, in 2 or 3 lines, it takes one of the examples, divides by the number to get the figure, shows it compared to Ofgem and say, there we are. And he won't accept it. So he just ignores me. So in other words, now this is really important. I'll tell you why, because it's going to be, if you imagine a brick wall of lies, which is what net zero is,
yes,
you penetrate it. Well, my simple way to penetrate it is with something everyone can understand, which is this. This is a lie. Now, as soon as you break into that, if Simon Hart agreed with me, which he had no choice, by the way, because it's factually correct.
Yes.
If he agrees with me, I'm right. And hold on here, everyone's lying about the number of homes they can supply. Everyone. Yes. That starts to open up the Pandora's box for me to get inside and expose it. Now, I have held public meetings where I had a public meeting up in Derby, and nearly 100 people there. And Extinction Rebellion tried to stop it. It was at an election time, actually, so they couldn't stop it legally. But they were in the audience. And I said to the audience, stop me after each subject and cross-examine me. They love that. And the actual Extinction Rebellion ex-member said to me, when the chief Haslam came of Extinction Rebellion to give him a talk, he talked for 2 hours and wouldn't allow any questions at the end, walked away.
No.
And he's totally different to you. But at the end of that meeting, someone said, I think you're being disingenuous. He was Extinction Rebellion. I think you're being disingenuous. I said, why? And he said, because when there's no wind, we know we could use gas. So I said, I explained all that. You missed the point. Of course we do. In fact, you need 100% gas backup. You can't use nuclear or coal because that's too slow. Yes? And you have to have the gas to do the backup. And I said, but it's really good that I've got Extinction Rebellion on a film telling me to use gas to back up wind. I said, that's brilliant. Yeah. So after that meeting, a meeting was arranged with Extinction Rebellion on Zoom with me, which again is recorded. And there was one of the lords. He was one of the Green Lords in the House of Lords. I didn't know this at the time.
Right.
And there were 4 of them. So they had a PhD bloke on in biology or something. And he tried to claim, he was trying to get me, he was trying to get a gotcha. So he tried to basically explain that too much CO2 is going to harm plants, which is so bloody ridiculous. It's unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
And I finished with him. He left the meeting quite early. I ended up with just the Lord as it happened. And he said, I still think you're wrong. I said, he said, they're developing new coal systems, new coal plants that can react fast to the drop in the wind. I said, well, that's fantastic. We've now got Extinction Rebellion backing coal as well as gas. And so I'm really happy. So people run away from me. So in an attempt, after doing the 15-minute city talk I gave in Oxford, and that was big, that was 7,000 to 10,000 people there, only 20,000 could hear it. After that, I came up with an idea. No, it wasn't. It was James from Students Against Tyranny or something. He came up with the idea of sitting me outside Oxford University, Trinity College, with a huge placard. I mean, it's 10 feet wide, and it said, green energy is too expensive, is unaffordable and impossible or something. Debate me, right? But no, the people who sat down to debate me, there was one 19-year-old kid who sat, and he'd just been brainwashed all his life. It was easy to deal with him. None of the people who really opposed me would sit down with me. And I even then had a Green Party activist who I think he was responsible for the northeast of Britain. And I heard he would debate anyone. He said, I'd debate anyone anywhere. So I said, fine, debate me then. And he said, yes, he'll debate me. So he agreed through the third party he's going to debate me. So he watches my videos and then withdraws and won't debate me. So I'm Billy No Mates. Yeah, I'm
Yes.
Billy No Mates. You know what? I then had a producer. I know these are all anecdotes, but they're interesting, I hope. I then had a producer say, why don't you go on the London Palladium? I reckon I can sell the tickets. And he'll sell the tickets £75 a head. You got enough people in London to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And debate someone like Lawrence Fox, Professor Lawrence Fox, who's just produced the best-selling book on climate called The Science Behind Climate or something changing, right? It was the #1 seller in the non-fiction in Amazon. Yeah. So we arranged a Zoom call with Lawrence Fox. Sorry, Lawrence Fox says me, Lawrence Krauss, sorry, Lawrence Krauss. And so first time, he's a nice man, Lawrence Krauss. And he says, as soon as I start, I say, look, I'm not going to dispute your maths. I'm disputing your data. Your data's wrong. And he said, I don't know my data, Paul. What? I don't know my data. So I went on. I said, do you think there's a climate emergency? He said, no, it's at least 300 to 1,000 years away. So I said, oh. So he said, look, if we're going to discuss data, I've got to get another professor on, who's the one who came up, I think Dan Smith or someone like that. He came up with Snowball Earth. He made himself famous with Snowball Earth. And so he joined for the next Zoom call. But in the first Zoom call, Lawrence said something. I said, well, let's start with the hockey stick. And he said, what hockey stick? Now, let me tell you something. If you don't know what the hockey stick is in discussing climate, you know nothing.
Nothing.
And I said, a hockey stick or the temperature, man's hockey. No such thing, Paul. You're confused. He was ridiculing a bit me, trying to be nice, but, saying, no, Paul, no. And I've got him on video saying this, by the way, so it can't be disputed. Right.
That is incredible.
Right.
I think the hockey stick was everywhere, especially when the
foundation of alarmism.
Exactly, and people were then coming up for reasons why the hockey stick was the way it was. An excuse for it.
That's right.
And emails were leaked over that. I mean, it's extraordinary that somebody in the industry would have no notion.
Or the best-selling book on climate change at the time.
Yes.
Yeah. So we had the next meeting with the two professors. And at that meeting, I said to this other one, the other one, Dan, I said, what about the Black Spruce Forest? Now, by the way, it was established for 1,500 years, 18 miles north of the tree line now in Canada. It's just a fact. Right, and was dated around about 1,000 years ago. It died out when we entered the Little Ice Age, and it had a fire, never recovered. And he said, no, that could be caused by temporary jet stream. No, not for 1,500 years it couldn't. The jet stream can change on the weather. Jet stream changes weather.
Right.
When I started my first big videos, came up with, I looked ahead. And I said, what these so-and-sos are going to do, and I think I was the first to do it. I know of no one else doing it at the time. I said, they're going to start using extreme weather alarmism. Yes? And that's what's happened, of course. They use weather for climate, which is totally different. So what happened then was they said, would you debate both of us on the Palladium? So I said, yes, I would, because, you see, my attitude is very simple. I just take the scientific approach. Say I'm wrong about something, I'd rather know I'm wrong.
Yes.
Carrying on being wrong. So I cannot lose by being wrong. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I can't be embarrassed by being wrong. I mean, let's face it, since they put that new telescope up into space, they've had to reevaluate the entire birth of galaxies. Yes. All the scientists, the further you get away from politics, the more science you get, by the way. And astrophysicists are more like science. And so they've really got an exciting time because it's even questioning the Big Bang Theory. Yes? Well, that's what science is. So...
so just to jump in there, what's interesting there is, of course, we've been told the science is fixed. That's it.
I know. I'll come to that.
And I mean, we had that with the pandemic. There was only that we're following the science, and this seemed to be the mantra on all of these.
Look what's happening now.
And look what's happening. Exactly.
So then they wanted two against one debate, no problem, because that would be more effective. Because I knew they didn't know the subject. I already knew something. Yeah, I didn't want to give away too much in the conversations we had because I thought they really don't understand this. And then they said, but we've got to control the meeting as well. And what we will do is you be questioning us, and we will sort of present it. We can't risk the message being wrong. To which I said, there's
Can't
no point in
risk
the
the
meeting.
message
I said,
being
no, I
wrong.
want an independent chair, and I would want 50% of the time.
Yes.
I want it two-way, but I want an independent chair to ensure that. They couldn't agree to that, and it collapsed.
Right.
So, but that gave me confidence in a way. Hold on, I've just been with some of the world experts in this, and they don't know the subject. So there's so many. You see, there's no such thing on two levels as climate change scientists, because if they use statistics, if you one of them developed, there's a system regression analysis used in economics, which is a very complicated subject in stats. And a bloke came up with a fingerprint of climate. So a weather event can be a fingerprint of climate change. Yes, it's a system used in statistics, and he won a Nobel Prize for this. Yeah, only 2 weeks after, a little while after, the paper came out from a statistician saying this wouldn't even pass the first term as a novice in it, because he hadn't equalized the data to begin with, what we call normalize the data to begin with. The mistakes were so fundamental. And the problem is, climate involves so many disciplines: physics, it involves maths, it involves statistics, it involves this and the chemistry. It involves so many things. There's no such thing. But I don't think on the biggest issue there aren't any real scientists anyway, because without the debate, without open to criticism, without the censorship, you can't have censorship in science. So I regard none of them as scientists. They don't
Right.
obey the scientific process, which makes them non-scientists in my eyes. Now, I'm shattered again, coming back to the question, how can they get away with it?
Yes.
Well, Simon Hart, my MP, is getting away with refusing a simple division. Yes.
So just ignoring it and pushing you away. So he's not debating. He's not
You're a
taking it on.
conspiracy theorist. I don't share it. Bang. And yet,
Yes.
it's two lines. There's the figure. Divide by
Yeah.
the number of people. You get so much energy per home. Yeah. That's only 1/5 of what's being claiming. It's as simple as that.
Yes.
I'm not going to let this go. I'm going to drive this. I'll print leaflets. I'll distribute them. I will drive this and drive it. Not because by itself it's hugely important. As a spearhead on my new video, I've got a brick wall, and I'm sending spears through to break open the brick wall. And I'm using this as the arrow. So I'm using the arrow as this argument, because once you begin to, they have to accept this. I'll be in public meetings for the coming election, and I will question him. Can't you do simple division? Yeah. Because you're lying, you're perpetuating. And what they've just done on the energy bill is another subject we'll deal with. But so it's because people have to come home, have to look after their kids, and have to pay their mortgage. That's why the scientists are now totally debased science. Nature and science journals are the prestigious journals, yes? But they're now corrupted in terms of agenda. There's an agenda. If you're going to go against that agenda, you won't have a career. And we have examples of that. Peter Ridd, is it, from the Great Barrier Reef? He was the scientist in charge of investigation for Cook University. He got sacked for reporting, basically, it's healthy. In fact, it's healthier than we've ever seen it. And a year later, a whole team of people published a report saying it's the healthiest it's ever been. Yes?
Yes.
Not a single island has sunk. Not a single island has sunk.
Well, we're continually told the Maldives are going to disappear, aren't we?
They held a cabinet meeting in the Maldives in aqua suits, sub aqua suits on the bed of the sea with a table to say we need money, to combat this. They've actually grown. The average growth rate is 8 or 9% of those islands. Yes,
Right.
Vanuatu, which is quite nice. I sailed near to Vanuatu. I wish I'd have gone. That's grown by 2.8%. Only this year, the president of Vanuatu said we need money now to combat it. It's grown. Yeah. And by the way, that growing of those islands were noticed by people way back in the 17th, 18th centuries when they were touring and so on. And Darwin noticed it and published it, how islands grew and so on. So all that is fake. The polar bears. We stopped shooting them in 1970s, got a Arctic Nations agreement to stop shooting them very much, and they've now quadrupled in size. Yeah. But
Yeah.
that was the WWF symbol of, everything is climate now. Everything, you'll see
Yes.
headlines. It's meaningless headlines. Let's take, I recently, last year, we had the highest temperature and all this in the UK going back. Yeah. I think it was 42 or 41.
That's right. Yeah, I remember it.
So my video on that shows you the location, the map. Yeah. With the jets and the jet engines passing over it. It's on the slipway. It's on the runway.
Of the thermometer.
Yes,
Yes.
it's on the runway. And it isn't as simple as people think. I was in charge of all the hydrology stations for the water industry in Wales. And when you go to a Stevenson box, it isn't as simple as you think. Unless you won't get a good reading unless there's a 10 meters up, about 20 miles an hour of wind to give the ventilation. Because
Right.
without the wind through the box, you don't get the air temperature.
Yes. Otherwise,
So
it's just got the box
it
temperature,
cooks,
the internal.
it overreads. So there's lots of things, much more complicated than people think. Actually, just getting a temperature.
Mm.
But so when you're doing science and coming up with things, you've got to try to prove it wrong is one thing you must do. So if you
Right.
come up with a hypothesis and you've tested it, trying to develop a theory, let me try to prove this wrong. They don't do that. They don't do
No.
any of that.
No. It's fixed. It's
And they
fixed.
don't get fixed from the beginning. You don't get the money, basically, unless the outcome. If I wanted to study the sex life of starlings in southeast of the UK, I wouldn't get a grant. But if I wanted to study the influence of the climate on the sex life of starlings in the southeast of the UK, I would. It's as simple as that. So there's an agenda. And there was a bloke called Hitler that people may have heard of. And
Rings a bell.
he basically was in charge of Germany in the Second World War.
Ah, yes, that's the fella.
He published a book, Mein Kampf, which laid out what he was going to do. And he was a man of his word. He did. He did invade Russia, despite the agreement, yeah, and so on. And it's almost the same today with the WEF and the World Health Organization. It's almost the same.
Yes.
Do away with cars, do away with this. In Wales, in a few days' time, on the 17th of September, the whole of Wales, where they've got a 30, become a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. That's going to increase pollution, right? That's going to increase pollution because the cars aren't designed for that. You're going to be in first and second gear a lot.
I think, well, that's going to do to the engines.
Yes.
And
I
all
know.
of that.
I know, 20 minutes. And then, as someone said to me today, actually, this morning when I was with the eye specialist in the waiting room there, someone said to me, Paul, my husband drives for a living and he's limited to his hours. And what this is going to do is limit the work he can do. So
Yes.
there's immediate economic things. And just like the great town in the northeast of Britain last week declared we're stopping the low traffic neighborhoods because it's increased pollution, so there's all these mad schemes coming up. But, life is getting much worse than that. The aim now, and it's there in the WF, is to do away with your car, to do away with air travel, maybe allowed a short haul every 2 years. Yeah, no car, short haul every 2 years. Under the 15-minute city, you're only allowed outside your home with a car 100 times a year, including work. So,
Which is, yeah.
And so it's now become absurd. I'm hoping now that when it's hitting people, and there's much more to come, wind energy, I've done so many videos on wind and solar now, but wind energy is so expensive. In Scotland, we pay about 50% of the time not to turn the turbines on, not to turn them on. I mean, and then when we're short of energy, we have to buy in from Belgium at up to 50 times the price. At times, we'd have to give it to Belgium and pay them 50 times the price to take it because they didn't want to turn off their things. So it's so mad. Now, there's another story. I'll take you right up to date on one, which is wind farms. The government, Sunak's just announced we're going to have, after saying no onshore wind farms, onshore. I published a video a while back saying offshore is dead. I had the sea coming over it. I said there'll be a lot of talk, a lot of babble. It's dead. And the reason it's dead is the offshore industry came to the government for the next round of auctions, which have just happened, right? And they've failed. They haven't got anyone, right? Because they wanted 250% hike in price. 250%. Now, that would put, for the next 30 years, 40 years, the price up fantastically to every one of you.
Yes.
So
And we
the
couldn't
government
afford
can't
it.
do it. The government can't go that mad. So they've now, before this happened, a week before this happened, they've said, "Oh, we're going to do onshore now." Yes. So they're kids in charge of a country.
Yes.
No, they're not. They're worse than that, because children would have a better heart about it. They're idiots and corrupt people in charge of our country. It's as simple as that. I
Yes.
couldn't sit down for 2 minutes. And then on this wind, having refused, having not got anything because they can't increase the price by 250, you've got Ed Miliband appearing on telly yesterday and saying they're wrong, they're ruining our future. In other words, he would accept the 250% increase. Yes. I mean, Labour, I mean, Conservatives are bad, bad, terrible people,
Yes.
except for those 19 people who voted against, not all Conservatives, but I think 18 are, 19 people who voted against the energy bill, which I come to this week. Yes, that those are decent people with principles. So there are some, but out of the entire 650 MPs, I'm listing on my next video the 19 who have integrity. Yeah, it's as
Yes.
simple as that.
And I mean, it's clear from what you're saying. There is this agenda, and they are so involved in this agenda that even if they can see the logic and do the mathematics and go, "Hang on a minute, this Paul Burgess bloke is right, isn't he?" They can't say it. They're
No,
not allowed to
Simon
go along
Hart.
with it.
Simon Hart can't say it because he's whipping people the other way. He's backing all this net zero to the
Yes.
degree the other way. So if I'm right, he's wrong,
Yes.
and it starts to crumble the entire wall, which is what my next video is based on, and he's wrong. So the whole thing starts to crumble, and yeah, it's so simple, because what I'm trying to use as the arrow, as I mentioned before, is something every child could understand.
Yes.
This is how much power they say they give. This is how many homes, divided by, and you'll get how much per home. It's as simple as that.
Yes.
It's no more complicated than that. And yet he won't accept it. And that barrier, that brick wall, is what we've got to break. And somehow behind that brick wall, there must be many people, as you just said, who are thinking, actually, this isn't right. You know,
And as you say, simple mathematics that a child can do. Eventually, people have got to turn round and say, "Hang on a second, we are actually being duped here,"
yes,
and rise up en masse and say, "Enough is enough. This is, if you're going to remain in power, then you've either got to change your tune
that'll
or."
never happen.
Yeah,
They're cardboard people. You
yes,
might as well have cardboard stick up things in most of those
yes,
seats in Parliament, except for very few.
yes,
You might as well have those. Andrew Bridgen is one that stood out. Rees-Mogg voted against the energy bill. I have respect. I don't agree with everything he does, but I have respect for the man. He stands for his principles, and there are 19 of them who stood for their principles on the energy bill, which is so bad. We'll come to it, as I said. I can't believe it. The other thing that they're doing as part of don't forget, we've had 20 odd years now of brainwashing our children. So we brought people up brainwashed. We are not allowed to present the alternative. You're just
no,
not
and
allowed.
I mean, if you're brainwashed, it's very hard to, even when you look at simple sums, as you've just alluded to then make that leap that actually
Very hard.
that they've been brainwashed,
Yeah.
and that they're wrong. It's a huge jump for people
Yeah.
to sort of go, but once they get it,
Mhm.
then the emotions will go from anger to annoyance to
Yeah.
and going, "Hang on a sec, we've got to do something. This, you can't do this." And do you think we're getting close to a point where people are
I
beginning
think
to
if
see
people,
through the?
well, one way or the other on that, Richard, is, well, if we don't break in the next year or two, if it doesn't break with
Hmm.
all the restrictions that are coming on, if people don't wake up, that they almost deserve what's coming. Because if they don't wake up to the car is being done away with, yeah,
Yes.
they don't wake up to the costs which we're already suffering. Um, we have a British invention called a stable salt reactor, right? And this is part of the brick wall. A scientist, a nuclear scientist, physicist, contacted me privately And he said, I can't use my name. And he's on a government committee. I want to explain what the stable salt reactor is because it needs promotion. I investigated it. He told me, imagine what it does is it burns the old nuclear waste from all our previous nuclear stations. And that nuclear waste, he said, is in two simple forms. It's in 10,000 year before it's safe, or 300 year before it's safe. There's two lots. This nuclear stable salt reactor takes the 10,000 year stuff, processes it, and turns it into 300 year stuff. So it makes the waste much safer and cheaper to keep. Yes? Right. One. We've got enough for 400 years to supply the entire grid.
Wow.
Right? So that's a British invention, right? A few years back. I think it's called Molinex, the company. I've got no shares in it, no interest in any of this, right? But Canada is the one who took it first. And they've been developing now. They're doing trials on it, etc. And America, this last year, about 6 months ago, I read, have just taken it up as well. But the one who hasn't taken it up so far is UK. Yeah, and that's typical, isn't it, of the UK? We invent something and then we let others develop it.
And let others, yes, absolutely, right. And profit.
So there are solutions, but and so what we need is fracking. And all the scare stories about fracking are ridiculous. You know, I mean, the earthquake, I've done a video on this. America allows 3,500 times the magnitude of earthquake that we allow. Right? If I drop my cup now onto the floor, it creates as much as they're allowed. It's impossible. People don't understand that. Fracking to take the fast variables of the daily demand, forget wind and solar, they're just the fast variables of the daily demand, and so on. I was also water resource engineer for the largest pump storage scheme in Europe at the time, which was in Norwich in North Wales. But I work out things like when we had the 9 days without wind as a simple thing. I try to take simple examples. That's not the worst deficit of wind and solar, but we had that in 2018, I think September, October, November, about the autumn of 2018. We had 9 days. So I took the 9 days, and the shortage was 7,200 gigawatt hours. We can store 9.1. We need 7,200 to make it up, and we can store 9.1. So pump storage is great. But when you're having a big football match on telly and the whole world's watching,
yes, it comes to just draining the whole lot.
And it comes to a team break, in 3 seconds they can whack and give a pile of energy.
Yes,
great, but it's not for long-term storage like this, because if you take the biggest battery in the world, now we're looking for 7,200 gigawatts. The biggest battery in the world is 1.6 gigawatts. Got a long way to go, haven't we?
Yeah.
The cost of that, if we try to cover it in the battery, I think it's 3 or 4 trillion it would cost, but it would be worse than that because we drain all the resources of the battery for the world. The prices would shoot up. So I do background graphs showing you how copper mines now, we took the easiest ores first, the cheapest to mine, and how it's getting more and more expensive because we're mining less and less pure copper ore. Yes?
Yes.
So there's all these effects.
So you need more resources to get a depleting raw material. And
of course, the simplest thing of all is if you take the graph of the CO2 growth that's going on in the world CO2 growth, and you plot, as Tony Heller does, you plot all the conferences on, they make no difference at all. Not at all. Not whatsoever. So all these conferences don't make any difference whatsoever. But we have a great friend called China who develops a system where they actually carry on they open more coal power stations in a week than we produce in CO2 in a year. You know, I mean, we're negligible. It isn't just if we disappeared, if America disappeared, if Canada disappeared, if we disappeared, if Europe disappeared, New Zealand, Australia, they all disappeared. CO2 would still carry on growing. Yes? And to ignore that fact, it's ridiculous.
Yes.
So you either come to the conclusion that we're led by really stupid people, or these people are somehow, or they've got a cult, and it's a cult where they've just got to keep on going regardless. Yes? And you see that cult in these poor fools, Stop Oil. I have to say something. I managed to get a Stop Oil activist. I was arrested and actually he pleaded guilty because there was no way out of it. I was at Swindon doing a 15-minute talk, and he came up to a loaded table of stuff, lifted and threw it. Right? So I wasn't going to let that go. So I went and spent an hour and a half in the police station, And he ended up pleading guilty, and he got a 9 months or 9 or 10 months suspended sentence, and he got a fine of 100 odd quid. But the big part for me is, and he got, he's bound over on the suspended sentence, and he's got a criminal record now. And he was one of the ones who managed to paint one of those paintings in London.
Oh, was he? Oh, yeah. Right.
So yes. I don't give in. I don't allow these stupid people who don't understand anything about science.
No.
I mean, why don't Stop Oil debate me on a Zoom? Yeah, debate me. Extinction Rebellion, debate me. Yeah, debate me. And they don't. They won't.
No.
They'll say it's accepted science, and the 97%, as everyone knows, is more like 0.3%. Yes, it's not that way. But it's now got such a power grip through education. And there's a new thing called carbon literacy course, a carbon literacy certificate.
Oh, no.
Carbon literacy certificate, which are running in schools, councils are running them, and then companies are running them. So someone will come along and teach your people 1-day course, and all those individuals get a big badge, carbon literacy badge. Yeah, yeah, and they're okay. They're
good people now. They're good people.
So I've got a video coming out showing you one of those courses and how pathetic it is. And of course, that means I'm illiterate then, because I don't accept any of what they're saying, right? And so me with my qualifications, I'm a history and everything, my mathematical model and all that, I don't know anything, because this 1-day course done by people who've taken maybe a week's course or something in propaganda. That's terrible. It really is terrible, And what they're doing to our children in education is terrible. It shouldn't be allowed. It should not. It's criminal what they're doing, right? But we see it in all areas. We see it in biology, don't we? We see it we see it in people saying there's no such thing as a woman and all this. So,
absolutely, everything has been completely distorted. Yes. Going back to that energy bill, I've heard that, of course, that you're going to be put in prison if you disagree with the stance that the government has taken.
That's right. Well, let me explain what it is. They have reserved statutory rights to ministers. This means that the minister can issue a new criminal law enforced by the police without going through Parliament, without going through any testing, any debate. The minister can say this is now criminal. This empowers the minister now to say log burners are banned. And if you have a log burner in your home,
which I do,
knock at your door and you can face up to a year in prison or £15,000 fine. Yes? Or they'll say, your house has to be insulated to a higher standard, even though you can't afford it, even though lots of houses can't be. Yes? I'll come to that. If you give an example, a heat pump produces water at 40 degrees centigrade, a radiator at 73 degrees centigrade. You need 220% more radiators to get the same heat output. You look at the average house, you can't more than double the radiators. And you can't put underfloor heating in. It's too late. You have to rip up the whole house. Yes? It's madness. And then they're not generating enough energy in the plan to drive the heat pumps. Because what you're doing is you're taking energy from gas and oil and you're swapping it over. And that's another thing that is a lie, which I've exposed recently in my last video. If you put all the solar and wind together, even though it's variable and everything, all it produces only comes to just over 6% of the energy requirement for the UK, because only 20% of the energy is in the grid. The 80% is in your vehicles, in industry, in all sorts of areas. Yes, and you often see people mix up the two in headlines. I've got headlines in my video where the headline says, with 40 or 50% now of the energy in the UK supplied by wind. No, that's not true, because it's 40 or 50% that day of the 20%, which is the amount on the grid. Yes. So there's so many things to deceive people with. People just want to be left alone to get on with their own lives. So I'm an awkward thing, but they're not. But they will come for me. Yes. I'm not religious. But if I was to be religious and pray, the dream I would have would be to debate Ed Miliband, because he's nuts. He's totally flipping nuts. But he's likely to be our new energy minister. And that really worries me. That really worries me. I've got him on video standing in front of a wind farm singing, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind, and telling us how many homes it does. And I just say, lie. That's out in the video, actually. So that's what I try to do in the video. I try to, get some impact. I don't do them to the same standard as I do my travel documentaries. That's like proper television standard. I do them, enough to entertain, but without me spending huge amounts of time on them. But most of my time is spent thinking how I can present it. The more CO2 video starts off with Oliver Twist asking for more gruel, But I do make mistakes because I asked for more porridge, and it should have been gruel. I was pointed out by my missus after it went live, but it was too late. So
I know that feeling. I know that feeling well.
Right. So the new Energy Act also has got provision. So it's going to make you, the householder, criminal. It can even ban you from living in your own home that doesn't meet standards.
And this is all part of this. You'll own nothing and be happy.
Yes, it is.
Although I can't quite see how you'll be happy.
No.
But you'll rent back your property, presumably at some exorbitant
amount. The state will run everything.
And and we can see. I mean, this is the thing. And but I think you're right in that you need to take the most simplest of arguments and put it in front of people, because if you can crack it on a very simple way and say, take this from this and what do you get? It doesn't get that, does it? But that's what the government are saying. Correct. So that people go, oh, that seems, that's wrong. Well, obviously they got that wrong. I wonder if they've got this wrong. Then do this and this. Right. And does that,
you have to chip away. You have to get one brick out the wall to get the car in and open it up.
Absolutely. If you throw everything at them, they turn around and go, no, you're a conspiracy theorist. But if you have to do it very slowly. We haven't got a huge amount of time, of course. We need to get those bricks out.
But yes. I mean, what Simon Hart doesn't understand is I've been on television many times with campaigns, and I've won them. And I've got the biggest consumer show refund in world history on a campaign I had. I've had chairman of public authorities sacked on a campaign I had. I've won, you name the battle, when I've done it, and I will not let go with Simon Hart. I will not let go. So if you ever watch this, Simon, I'm still going to be at you every single time I can. You will not get any escape. I'm going to name him in the international conference I'm going to. Yes, because to me, this is the example I'm using to get that first brick out. Yes. And all you've got to do is say, yes, that's right. That's all you've got to do. A simple division is right.
Yes. And I think it's very important that you do, that you put people on notice personally, because it's very easy to put an idea or a concept on, but ultimately, like with corporations, it's all run by real people.
Yes.
And somewhere somebody is making those decisions.
Correct.
Like you said with Ed Miliband, somebody is eventually, you say, well, it's you. And you put them on notice in the way that you are with Simon Hart. I think that's the way forward.
I did warn him. I did try to say,
yes.
Don't do this.
Yes.
My wife sort of says, people who do this against me don't know what they're in for. They just don't know what they're in for. I had 11 questions from the House of Commons on the one campaign, and I got criticised by the local Conservative at the time. He said, why have you let all the other parties in on this? So I ended up with support from Liberals, Labour and everyone supported me. So all asking the questions. And of course I won the campaign. And that's what I do. So, but he's treating me as an idiot. He's treating me as someone who can't, simply divide one number by another to get that number.
But he won't do it himself.
He won't. Well, no, he just after the first line, I don't join in with your conspiracy theory. Go ahead and publish a video. Because I gave warning. I didn't want to embarrass the man. What I wanted to do was have him agree, then meet him and explain to him just the consequences of this.
Yes.
But if the chief whip of the party, as he is, agrees I'm right, think of the implications.
Well, exactly. He can't. He's between a rock and a hard place, isn't he?
I'm just going to turn off my phone. Sorry.
No, that's okay. But that's the problem with a lot of these people. They're slowly being pushed, I think, into a position where they have so little power now, other than to ignore the obvious. I mean, we've seen it with so many different things, such as the ULEZ cameras, which are going up on the basis that it's clean air and we'll get rid of which again is rough. And nobody's voted for any of this. I mean, it would be okay.
They fiddled the consultation and everything.
Well, yes.
Sorry, I interrupt.
Yeah, no, but this is the point, and slowly, although as we say, we don't have much time, but they are getting themselves on this ever thinner tightrope. It seems to me, because the absurdity of the arguments, and the more tyrannical the policies, people at some point have got to go, hang on, just wait 1 second. Even if there is and
I know.
climates change. Nobody's saying they don't change.
Mhm.
It's just the rate of response is so bizarre.
Correct. And in fact, if you analyze what's happening on all the cycles,
Mm.
we're now in a cooling period, believe it or not. And between now and 2035, if you just take all the cycles throughout the last couple of thousand years and where we are now, there's a 69-year cycle that we're on a depression down on. Well, on that forecast, it'll come down to 2035. We won't get as cold as the Little Ice Age. Then it'll pick up again for a few years and then down deep. So, if anything, we're heading into a cooling period. Yeah.
Yes.
And as time goes by, that's going to become more and more apparent. But that's almost too late, because
Yes.
China is providing us with the rope to hang ourselves by supplying us with the wind turbines and the solar panels, whilst laughing their heads off, is all I can say. And what we're doing is destroying Western economy. The German car industry is, as I've just warned, is being wiped off. It's being wiped out. Yes. So is the British car industry being wiped out. I'm going to declare something now which may confuse people. I have a Tesla. That really does confuse people. I got a Tesla because I hate driving, and when I'm going between my main routes, it drives me all the way by itself, and I love that, right? But I have increased the CO2 by buying it, because I've got to do 160,000 miles before I even cover its footprint. And so I know, because people think I'm a climate freak when they see me in it. I'm not.
Yes.
The exact opposite. That I could afford to buy that Tesla. Most people can't. And the drive towards electric cars is so wrong. It really is. But it isn't really. It's a drive, because if there was a real drive towards electric cars, just think about this. You'd be planning for all that petrol and diesel to be replaced by electric, wouldn't you?
You would.
But no one is planning that generation.
No.
No one is planning it. That is, do away with the cars. Yeah, full stop.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's been in the town where I am there, in the street, I think they've put in 3 or 4 on one particular road, these charging points. Nobody's using them,
No.
and it's tokenism,
Yes.
and it's there to sort of fool you that the whole infrastructure, because most people have no idea
Absolutely.
actually what would be involved, and the trillions that you would need
I know.
to. And people just have no concept. They just think
There aren't
just...
enough resources for the batteries. What you're doing is replacing gas and liquid oil things, and you're replacing it with hard metals and rare earth and so on. You're replacing it with a lot of mining. Yes. And
Yes.
doing that mining, because rare earth metals are everywhere. They're not rare in that sense. They're only rare in the sense that they're in a very low concentration. So you need a huge mine to get a bit out. And to do that, you need a lot of environmental destruction. So you move that to China and places.
Yes, where it's not seen.
Or Peru and places. You move that away from you to get it. And so it's not even viable to have to have it. I'm 78, so this car will be out the rest of my life probably. Yeah. And I don't enjoy the driving. I've had many years of it. I don't like it. So the ease with which I can go from A to B is great for me. I still have my hand on the wheel, but it's doing it nearly all. Yes, that's what I bought it for, nothing else, and that's why I wouldn't buy any other electric car, because it can't do that. So, but I tell people that because they're confused sometimes, when they find out that I've got a Tesla. So,
but even if, let's just assume for one moment that you could replace all the infrastructure, so that you get rid of gas boilers, you get rid of the wood-burning stoves, everything is electric. I mean, if that's not a monopoly that somebody then can say, oh, actually, electric prices have gone up.
Yes.
Or we're turning it off for a few hours in the day.
You'd have to have all sorts of protections, wouldn't you?
Wouldn't you?
It's not viable. It's just not viable. It really isn't. And I don't know. I mean, when is it going to collapse? We've got the same view. When all this
Yes.
starts to impact people, then it's going to collapse. What do we need? The first housewife put in prison because she couldn't upgrade her home and couldn't afford to do it?
Yeah,
What are
exactly.
they
Well,
on about?
there won't be enough prisons. That's the thing.
No.
You know, you'll have towns the size of, well, you'll have a city the size of Birmingham comprising of prisons because there'll be millions that can't afford it. I
Well,
mean,
look what
it is.
happened. Yeah, in Birmingham, they didn't pay the fines, did they?
No,
38 or 40,000 people didn't pay the fines, so
I
they.
don't blame them.
I don't blame them either. You know, under ULEZ, some people can't drive out the drive outside the home.
Yes, exactly, without being charged. I mean, the absurdity. It cannot, I mean, you know, one would hope that in some sort of sense it cannot continue, although we know ultimately behind all of this are very nefarious things. Paul, we've spent an hour. I like to keep these
Thank
to
you.
an hour. I really appreciate your time
Right.
and explaining this. Just give us again, where can people go? Because I've heard now that this platform I'm on, which I try not to use the name too much these days, has it starts to take off the links to other places if
Yes.
they think it's not a good place. So.
Right,
And if you're watching this on one of the other platforms, I should say that you know I'm not talking about you. What is the website? So if people
it's not a
can't,
website. It's just a YouTube channel.
oh, it's your YouTube,
Or
yes,
it's only on YouTube. I don't have a website
yeah,
because my media is video. You know,
yes, yes,
and that's why I want people have said write a book, and I don't want to because I can do the immediacy of things with video.
absolutely, it's
And
quicker
it's
as well.
called Climate Realism by Paul Burgess. Climate Realism by Paul Burgess. So if you put in youtube.com// climate realism with all the spaces, climate realism by Paul Burgess, you'll get the channel. And there's
I will
over
put it in there.
80 videos there on all sorts of subjects. Some of them go back, but I only put them up on, I didn't put them on YouTube originally. I put them on other platforms. I brought them to YouTube a couple of years ago. Some of them go back to 2012 and 13 and things. So,
Yes,
but they're still valid. Everyone is valid, and some of them, you know, like recently, I forecast that I recently forecast that offshore wind is dead. It's as dead.
yes,
And within weeks, I've got the government saying, "Oh, actually, we're doing onshore now." Yeah,
yes,
and
yeah,
then oh, what? The auction didn't get anything. You know, if children could see this, I'm
yes,
not being clever here.
no,
Children can see it. Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't realize an hour's gone with me chatting away like this.
Oh, I know, it's brilliant, and I really appreciate your time
Okay.
and enthusiasm. And yes, please carry on your work.
I answer every comment by everybody on every video.
Wow, I do
If you
try,
ask a
but some,
question on any of my
yes.
videos, every single comment is answered.
Well, bless you for that. That's amazing. When you've got 170
No, you couldn't do it.
thousand, you can't just can't
I've
do
only
it.
got 6,000 odd at the moment.
Well, we'll get you some more.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of my viewers will leap over.
Okay,
Paul, thank you
thank you.
so much. I really appreciate it. It's
Thank
been
you.
wonderful.
Thank you for listening.
So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Paul Burgess. Do check out the website and do go over and subscribe and look at those and think about it. And if you can think of any other ways to get people to wake up and get those bricks out, that's what we need to do. I'll be back with more of my interviews and the monologues. But until the next time, from Paul and I, thanks for watching. Goodbye.